The writer of Hebrews tells us in a simple sentence in chapter 11, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. And the emphasis is going to be on the faith of Joshua and of the people to do what God told them to do. We look first of all at obedience. These are some of the things that we can do in our own lives that strengthens our faith and prepares us for the things ahead of us. Obedience. We see that Joshua was given instructions to do something that didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. He was told to take the people on a march around the city. It would take roughly about 2 hours to go from where they were camped to go completely around the city and then back home. Probably only about 25 to 30 minutes going around the city of Jericho. They were to march silently. And the special order that he has put it, with soldiers in front, then coming with the priests with their ram's horns, then the Ark of the Covenant, then another group of people, and then the rear guard, the soldiers protecting the back of their column. They were to do that for 6 days. And you might say, as they went marching around, why in the world did they do that? And one of the reasons might very well be that even though it didn't make sense, God is trying to convey to them that He has a special way of working, totally outside what they are going to expect. This is not the way to assault a city. You try and batter down the doors, the gates. You try and scale the walls. You try and shoot the archers off of the walls so that you can get up and over. But God says, I've got a better way, and I want you to observe. And maybe going around those 13 times, 6 times once a day, and then the 7 times on the 7th day, was trying to impress on the people that God is the one who is doing the work. Time after time, we discover that God is trying to get us to understand that He's at work around us. He brings people into our midst. He raises up special talents and abilities. Sometimes people come totally unexpected into our midst for a season to help us in ministry. Sometimes people appear out of nowhere to help us in a time of difficulty. Sometimes an old friend reappears and helps us through a time of uncertainty and grief. God is at work, and we have to trust that He is preparing to do things and recognizing it when He's trying to do that. There's another thing here that we need to see, and that is even though what they are told to do seems to be rather ridiculous, they do it because they have seen God at work. And maybe part of our problem as Christians has been that we haven't been paying attention to God being at work around us. We haven't even seen and recognized what God has done. And we're not telling each other about the miracles that God has done in our lives, so that as a group, maybe we're not expecting God to be at work. The third reason here that may be appropriate is that there was a change in Joshua. He was convinced that God would be at work. And as a leader, that sureness on his part carried over to his people. His enthusiasm, his confidence might have become infectious. The life of faith, then, is a life of obedience to God's direction. And in the 7th chapter of Judges, we see an example of this with Gideon. He's called to fight against a great host of Midianites, 135,000 of them, with about 32,000 ill-trained Israelites. And before he goes into battle, God tells him that's too much, and keeps on whittling down the numbers until there's only 300 who are scattered around the camp they have a candle and a pitcher and a trumpet. And at just the right moment in the darkness, they break their pitchers, the lights flare out, and the trumpets are blasted. And the Midianites are so unnerved that they start running all over and attack one another. The people of Israel don't even have to fight. God often moves in very mysterious ways, and we are shocked sometimes by what God does. God gives us directions in His Word as to how to meet the Jerichos and challenges of our lives. And His directions are often absurd to the human logic, but if we have faith, we will obey His directions. It's a spiritual law. Disobedience reveals our unbelief, and obedience shows our faith. And when we show our faith, God has something to work with. Even though it may seem like a small amount, going back to that story of Jesus and the loaves and fish, the disciples are trying to feed a big crowd, and all they can find is a little boy who brought a lunch. And how in the world are you going to spread that out over everybody? Well, we don't know how it happened, other than in Jesus' hands, great things happen. God takes our small things and does wonderful things with it. Israel obeys. They go forth. And take note of the fact that the Ark of the Covenant is in the middle of the pack. It's central to what's going on. They believed that God was in their presence with the ark, and their God went forth with them. Now, God's everywhere. We know that. But the fact is, if we feel that God is in our midst, great things happen. And one of the things we need to do sometimes is look around and recognize that there are evidences of God being at work. Some of the people who are around us can surprise us at times with what they rise up and do. They become critical people at a critical time. And you say, where in the world did they ever get that oomph, that idea, whatever it is? God is at work because we focus in on faith. The ark was right there in the middle. They felt that their God was at work. Faith sees the presence of God where no one else does. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." Now, as the Israelites marched around Jericho, the Canaanites saw nothing but a ragtag bunch of people. They probably were laughing. What do these idiots think they're doing? And maybe it is their self-confidence, overconfidence, that left them wide open. Because when the walls come down, they are not prepared for the people of Israel to stream in. Then we look at a dependence on faith. Israel marched around the number of times that was given. They knew that God was trustworthy. They did it God's way. And then we see a declaration of faith, because they've done this 6 days. On the seventh day, they go around 7 times. And when Joshua tells them to shout, they shouted. Now, I don't know if it was the noise they were making, or if it was God had planned an earthquake, or whatever it was, but when they united their voices together, the wall tumbles down. And they go streaming into the city. Sometimes when we share our faith, it stops people in their tracks. It gives them a new insight in life. Sometimes when we share the things we believe, we cause people to step back and think about things in a different way. When we say to someone that we do something in a different way because of our belief in Jesus Christ, they might be taken aback. But then they see perhaps things in a different point of view. We live in a society which seems to be telling us that the Word of God is worthless. We have a society that is laughing at us as Christians, telling us that we are reading an old musty book that had no historical purpose. It's just a bunch of myth. But we believe we have a God who works through people, who changes life, who brings new creation into people's lives. And if we have the eyes to see, suddenly we might discover that there are angels all around us. Joshua was surprised to see that mighty warrior. And sometimes we discover that there are individuals who are at work in our lives that surprise us, whether they are physically angels or just God using someone. The right person comes at the right time. And inside Jericho, there was something else going on. There was a woman and her family that were closeted in her home. Rahab, a woman of a very checkered past, as we would say it, has sheltered the spies, hid them, and helped them escape. And they have promised that if she put out a scarlet cord in her window, that her home would be saved, and she and all who were within her house would be saved from the onslaught to come. It took a lot of faith on her part to watch the people of Israel go around the city on 6 particular days, doing it once in silence except for the blowing of the ram's horns. Their numbers must not have looked all that great, sort of similar to the 300 that Gideon would take against Midian. And yet she believed. And perhaps she kept on telling her family the story of what she had said to the spies. We have heard what God has done with your people. And she spoke of the fact that the people of Jericho, while they perhaps were laughing at the people going around there, were also fearful of them. Because wherever they had gone, they had triumphed. Rahab did what she needed to do. She voiced to her family what they would need to hear to do things the way God wanted it to be. And maybe there's a challenge to each and every one of us that we need to be talking to our families, sharing with them why we do things the way we do, sharing with them what we think is God's will in our lives, and helping them see God's will in their lives. True faith obeys God and His Word. True faith focuses upon God and sees the unseen. True faith depends upon God alone. True faith declares itself. So we ask ourselves the question, how is our faith today? How is the faith of our church? These things happen as an example for us who are still fighting the battles of life, to look around us and start seeing God's possibilities, not just the hurdles we have to get over. Yes, there are scary obstacles in our lives. Some of you are dealing with physical ills that seem to be overwhelming. Some of you have had personal experiences that have overwhelmed you, and yet God is at work. Can you see the signs around you? Are you trusting that God will give to you the victory, and to us as a congregation the victory? We now come to the Lord's Supper. That is a reminder of the unexpected and loving ways God works in our lives. Even the disciples of Jesus, who had traveled with him for 3 years, couldn't figure out what in the world this supper was about and why he was crucified on a cross. And yet God uses the most unexpected things to accomplish his purposes.